Israel, das mich beruchen besmadlich, aber ich hakovet, Mishpucha, Mishpachas Wasyng, Kol HaKodesh. Ich ruhe steht, Kishem Shemaspidem esu Anushim, also wenn Maspid Männer, Kach Maspidem es Nushim. Nushim noch Maspid. Ich bin nicht so angeführt, ich hatte mit Klieger, aber nicht angeführt, aber das steht sich nur. Kishem Shemaspidem esu Anushim, also wenn mit Maspid Männer, Kach Maspidem es Anushim auch. Wo ist der Chiddisch in dem? Steht, Kishem Shemaspidem es Anushim. Da du Männer haben verschiedene Sachen, was Frauen sind nicht mehr hier. Zuerst als Mann Grumme sind Frauen nicht mehr hier, Limit der Teure sind sie nicht mehr hier. Mit dem Allem sagt der Mechaber, derselbe Aspekt, Kishem Shemaspidem es Anushim, derselbe Aspekt, man sagt auf Männer, Kach Maspidem es Anushim, Aisha kommt darauf heuben, kein Zoom, der Achailik in der alle Sort Mitzvahs, auf jeden Fall, auf dem ich mit Zauber geworden, kein auch zum Achailik. Du haben mir von Aisha gedeutet, ein richtiger Aisha Schober, gewähnt, alle Jungen, stützt gebuchen zu können, alle Jungen können sitzen und lernen, aussteigen. Ich habe gesagt, der Chasseif hat gesagt, schon am Ende sagt die Mischle, Aishes Chael mi ihm zu. Sagt er, Lotten, dick die Klusche, die da sagen, Ishu Chayulu, nicht Aishes Chael. Sagt der Chasseif, Aishes Chael, weißt du, wo es ist ausgestiegen nach Chael, weil gehabt der Aishes Chael, gehabt einem zu dem gestippt zu dem, gegeben zu dem, geben der Ruhigkeit, wenn ich sanefisch, können sitzen lernen. Es kommt kol den Efteres, gewesen, der was groß heilig, die wurde tan nasche beim Sachien, der heilig von Teure von der haben wir ja gewaltige mal mit Teure, mach aber Spur, so der größte Schrie in dem heilig, a viele was ist heute nur schon in dem Schar, auf dem steht Kishem Shemaspidem so Anushim, Kach Maspidem Nushim macht. Aber wenn neues Losei ist sie gewesen steht für in der Mitte in der Bruche, was begeit daran bei Sachan, sucht man dort Jedaye Misper Kilchem Badin. Da habe ich weiß Pinkler mit Neftum zu tun. Ich habe Kadische weiß auch Pinkler. Das ist der größte Schwach von Heibischen. Das heißt, Jedaye Misper Kilchem Badin. Wer kann ich zeigen? Wo ist die größte Chiddisch? Ich habe mit der Ohr am Moidike Chiddisch. Da haben wir sie du Menschen, wir sind also wie Apo-Menschen. Du Menschen sind ein Komma-Mensch. Der Heibischte Jedaye Misper Kilchem Badin, der Heibischte kennt der Mensch, was nur ein Mensch ist, es können sich als Sachmenschen. Der Chushe wenn Efteres, sie gewinnen in jeder Aktivität von der jungen Geise, die in Stutt gemacht, ich weiß nicht, alle, ist sie gewähnt, ach heilig in dem, nicht kein heilig Stamm, noch heilig ist getein in dem, die lebt in alle Sorten, sie sind mit Geheulen, sie ist die Quartäne, alle Sorten, es ist alles Maße Geise, sie gewähnt sehr groß, sie gewähnt aktiv in dem, so getein in dem. Dem hier für Maße Geise, das ist die größte Sache, heute im Himmel. Es steht die Kliuko, Kalle Scheine, Jufes, Einzug, Dikach, Reu, die Gemur. So gesagt, die Gemur sagt, dass ich zu an, so die Gemur, wo man zieht. Kalle Scheine, Jufes, Aische, was hat ein breiten Herz, sie verginnt für andere, sie tit für andere, Einzug, Dikach, Reu, weil heute so dem Mal hat sie sicher der andere Malz. Dem Mal vergessen, ich hätte nicht als antige Welt, die durch die größte Sache steht in Zeit für Kommando, ich habe von Meiler, als der antige Welt ist steht noch nie vergessen. Und trefft der Medrisch, als da habe ich gefragt, Cem, für was ist die Seuche, wenn niemand zu leben, der Mabel? Der gesucht, weil die geben dem Beheim, es wird Chais, geht in der Maße Chesed. Und weil er in der Maße Chesed, ist du Hashem Tzilchu, in der Reibste macht mit dem auch Chesed. Ich sage, ich habe getan, also ich verchesed, ist Chitz in der Maße Chesed, was hat getan, und sie getan nach Chesed war ein ganzer Stutt. Weil wenn sie durch Chesed ist Stutt, da habe ich mal Spiel Chesed auf dem Stutt. Chitz in der Maße Chesed, was hat getan, für jede Sache, bis es von der alle nicht schruchen, was haben das gedacht tun. Aber der einzige Spur für Chesed steht der Medrisch, als Thomas ist, als ganz um sein übergelebte Mabel, was am getan Maße Chesed, scheint wegen dem steht, da wegen seiner Nächte, Sardino Meiler Käsel, Lietzi, wenn sie noch gerade alle Anche durch am Mabel getan Chesed, das ist nicht gekommen, weil es war klar, weil Mensch geht Chesed, Hashem Tzilchu, das ist eine der größten Sachen, in dieser Zeit getan, Jöim und Leile, sie werden aktiv in der Linie für Chesed, zum Beispiel wird Chesed nicht nur versiegt, sondern Spiegel Chesed war ein ganzes Stück. Da war jetzt ein größer Weide, ein größer Verlust, sei für ein Mann, ein größer Mann, sei für die Mischpuche, in sie fahren Stück auch, der größer Verlust, aber am Ende ist das auch getan. Die Gemüse sagt, dass Messer und meine Chabire, jeder Kola Chabire Killer, Jeder kann auch wieder meint, dass jeder einer probieren, Maschinen zu sein, die Chalukke muss es getan, muss gewonnen, dem Halal, auf jeder einer kennen, in dem der Iker ist, aber man kommt sich zusammen, ist der Teufel von der Schumme ist, als man lernt, man hört ihre Maßen Teufel, man sieht, dass ein Mensch kann oft in der Jugend, man probiert sich zuzulernen, das ist der größte Teufel von der Schumme, weil sie sagt, von einem Sack ist zu haben, das haben wir mit, steht der Chait, eine Liebe, aber den Aram zu haben, wie man macht, dass ich denke, der Ruf auf Kreis, sich ins Alte Ruf, auf die Geibe gesuchen, aber heilig auf den Schaden, ich komme mal Aid, und hat gedacht, ich geholfen werden mit Kindern, hat mir gut Schaden gesucht, aber darf geholfen, darf geholfen werden, damit in der Masse Geist, du gehst aufstellen, sag mir das Geist, aufgestellt. Da habe ich da geholfen mit Kindern, durch, ist das schon, die hat Kinder, mir nicht gewinnt schwer, sie will ruhig mit den Kindern. Kommt zur Rutzcham, ich kenne schon nicht weiter. Rutzcham gesucht, was? Der hat ihm gedenkt auf der Maße, ich meine, ich habe gedenkt, wir haben das schon ein bisschen. Die Maße gedenkt, ist später noch dem, die kommen die Menschen, sich Rutzcham nicht, der kenne ich weiter. Rutzcham gesucht, die siehst du, habe ich mit dem geholfen geworden. Wie kennst du das weitergehalten, aber noch hat Schickzeit, der kennst du nicht, den kenne ich. Und alleine die Kinder in der Schriften geworden. Und haben gesagt, ein Menschenleben darf gescheide sich in Chesed. Chesed ist eine gewaltige Sache. Welcher Mensch kann sagen, sie kisse Liebe, also ich bin rein und ich bin fein, kein Mensch nicht. Aber die Chesed ist eine Eure vernehmen, soll auch sagen Chesed, die Gemüse kann Marachem und Abriis, Marachem und Menashoma. So da habe ich die Helfentage, als sie sagen, haben wir jetzt die Schuhe kommen von ein großer Mann, für die Kinder, für die Heiligler, für die Heidemes, die alle, Schnien, die alle, und da habe ich selber, sie können umgehen weiter, Bieke, die Mann, sie können weiter sitzen, lernen, können weiter oft in Besmetrisch, in andere Plätze, in die Yeshiva, und sie sagen, mit die Yeshiva von ganz Besmetrisch, da habe ich selber, und stehe jetzt in einem Jahr, da habe ich selber in einem Jahr, sie sagen, ein Jahr noch für Simche, ein Jahr noch für Nachriss, ein Jahr, sagen, ein Schäfer, da habe ich selber alle so sagen, gesinnte stark, alle sagen, kein Gesinntheit gegen mich hier, zieht keine, wie meine,
My coming here is a very, very bittersweet occasion. On one hand, I'm honored that the Wasyng family asked that I should come to speak about the tremendous nifteras. On the other hand, it is so sad for me to be here on this occasion. My friendship with the Wasyng family goes back many, many years. I've admired them, I've revered them, I've treasured them, literally from the time that I first came to Antwerp, which might be more than 20 years ago. The first one to invite me, and I just want to give her Hazkara Satoiv, is Mrs. Olach. She should have Gesundheit Yoren. Many, many years ago, she was involved with the Agura, and she asked me to come to speak for the women. I had no idea where Antwerp was, what Antwerp was, and I called my dear friend Rav Simcha Bamberger, Shlita from Manchester, and he told me, if you go to Antwerp, you have to get to know Rav Baruch Wasyng and his Rebetzin. He's a great Talmud Chacham. It's a wonderful home of Chesed and Yerushalayim, and that's how I first got to know the Wasyng's, through Rav Simcha Bamberger, and I'm very, very grateful. I remember the first time that I was here, Rav Wasyng Shlita took me to Rav Traeger, and I had an incredible, incredible evening there. What he told me about the Indian of Zrizus is something that I've used in many, many drushas. He took me to Rav Kreisworth as well. And so I feel a tremendous sense of Hazkara Satoiv. What I've come to say tonight here, I think is so important that I actually called my dear friend Danny Benjamin because I found out that he's the one who's doing the video, and literally within 24 hours, this will be available for thousands and thousands of people around the world through TorahAnytime.com. Because I feel the Yesodis that we can learn from what Feigy Wasyng Allah Shalom was all about is something that should change and elevate every single one of us. The Torah tells us by the story that we all know. We all know that Moshe Rabbeinu saw the sneh and he turned to look. The Pasuk in Shmois Gimel Pasuk Daled tells us, Vayar Hashem kisor lirois. Hashem saw that Moshe Rabbeinu turned to look at the bush that was burning and it wasn't getting consumed. Vayikra Elov Elakim Mitoch HaSneh, the Eibishter called him, Vayeme Moshe Moshe Vayeme Hineni. So the Medrash asks a very interesting question. Anybody would look. Why do you need the Torah to tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu looked and saw the sneh? If you walk on Velgalai, right, and you see Hatzalah ambulance, or you see a fire, everybody's going to turn to look. So what is the Torah being madgish that Vayar Hashem kisor lirois? And the Medrash tells us a fabulous pshat in the Pasuk. Of course, there's no question that he turned to look. Everybody would turn to look. But what the Medrash is telling us, that these two words, sor lirois, was the definition of Moshe Rabbeinu's personality. He was a person who cared. He turned to look at the problems of others. And the lashon of the Medrash is, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter said, Ata hinachta asakta, iskacha v'halachta lirois b'tzaru shel Yisrael. You stopped worrying about your own affairs and your own things, and you came to look and see the problems of others. That's what the Medrash says. Ra HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Moshe she'esor me'asakav lirois b'sav loisam lefichach. That's why Vayikra Elov Elakim Mitoch HaSneh. The Eibishter called him because he was the definition of a person who cared. Now, Rab Chatzkel Levenstein writes, he didn't write it, he said it in a shmuz, and they wrote it in Or Yecheskel. And he learns a fabulous lesson. Mefurish Lanu b'Medrash. We see something in the Medrash as Chus Moshe. How did Moshe become the leader? Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu Yidaber Imoy. Lo Hoysa b'Shvil Chachmosai. It wasn't because he was the smartest, or he got lusai, or because he was the greatest. Ela b'Shvil Shayanoisei ba'oil in Klal Yisrael, because he cared the most, and that's how you become a leader in Klal Yisrael. Not because he was the smartest, not because he was the wisest, because he was a sor lirois. And what we all tonight have to learn from Feigy Wasyng Allah Shalom is to become a person of sor lirois. Life is not about you. Life is about what you can do for other people. And all the people that I spoke to, and I spoke to so many here in Antwerp, everybody mentions the things that she was involved with. Tikvatenu, special needs children. She didn't have children that had special needs. But when she saw that there was a lack of education, of Yiddish education for children with special needs, she got involved in Tikvatenu. She got involved in Shidduchim. How many Shidduchim she was always making and getting involved with so many, many different people. She was involved in Bikkur Cholim. What does it mean in Bikkur Cholim? Not only to set up that in the hospitals there would be snacks for the visitors and snacks and kosher food for the people that were in the hospital, but if people had to go for appointments, who's going to take them? There are many elderly people that don't drive, and they can't drive a bike like everybody does here. But how are they going to get to the appointments? So she arranged that. That's sor lirois. She wasn't sick, but she saw that there were people that were sick and had to get to the hospitals. She was involved in Yom Kippur to make sure that those people that had to eat a shear of food or a shear of drink, a certain amount of level, she measured it out and she made sure that the people had it. She wasn't only involved in little kids that needed attention, like Tikvatenu. She was involved in the elderly women Zeis Ranan, to make sure that elderly women would have shiurim. So she was involved in the whole gamut of Klal Yisrael. And then, of course, she became the Rebetzin of Beis Yaakov Shul. And Rab Baruch, of course, is the Rav Shlita. So she helped, and she was alongside, as the Rav said. She was the Eishes Chayil. But what we have to learn tonight is not only to become a person of Sar Lirais, because that's what she was, and that's what made Moshe Rabbeinu the great leader who he was, but how did she become like that? How did Feigy Wasyng become the great person that everybody loved, everybody cared about? She had a way of making everybody feel special, and she was all over the place, but she didn't make you feel bad that you weren't involved. She just got you involved. What was the way? How did she become like that? So I want to tell all of you a story. Now, some of you certainly know part of this story, but most of you surely don't know the whole story. And I think it's very important for every parent and grandparent to realize what we are now going to hear, which is literally life-changing and will give us a hadracha for life. The story evolves around a brilliant, wonderful, caring 22-year-old boy. This story happened way back. It started in 1936. In 1936, there was a bocher who lived in Holland, and he wanted to go to a yeshiva. And he came to Tel's Yeshiva in 1936. He wrote years later that he came in, and that began the 4 best years of his life, learning in Tel's. When he came, the first one that he met was Rabbi Yemei Bloch, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Livracha, who gave him a faher. This person was Nochum Goodworth. Nochum eventually would be Feigy's father. But I spoke to Nochum. I remember he told me. It's not like I heard it from anybody else. When he was living by Feigy and Rab Baruch in the back room, he shared one room and I shared the other room. And he told me that the stender that he had, and he always cried when he told it to me, the stender that he had was right next to the stender of the Ponevezher Rav's son Yankel. And he said that the Yankel, the son of the Ponevezher Rav, was just as charismatic and could have taken over the Ponevezher Yeshiva. But Rachmana litzlan, he never made it to Eretz Yisrael, and he was never reunited with his father, and he left Lithuania 2 weeks too late. He was thinking of coming earlier, and he was advised to stay another 2 weeks, and within those 2 weeks he was gone. And Rab Nachum always felt bad about that. So he was there for 4 years. And then in 1940, the world turned over, because all the Poland yeshivas were closed. And thousands of Talmidim from all the yeshivas came to Vilna. And Rav Chaim Oizer, who was the Gadol Hador, all of a sudden he had the achrayas of so many yeshivas, trying to put them in different shuls. There was no shul that could take all the Talmidim. There were 3,000 Talmidim all of a sudden in Vilna. And Rav Chaim Oizer tried to put them in different shuls in different areas, even some of them outside of Vilna. And now, in 1940, a number of miles, 40 miles away from where Vilna was, there was a city called Kaidan. And over there, the Tel's Yeshiva was near there, and they closed the Tel's Yeshiva. Now everybody knew that it was dangerous, because Lithuania could have been taken over by Russia. Eventually it would be taken over by the Nazis, and people wanted to get out. So Nochum Goodworth had a passport, and he tried to figure out how in the world could he get out of this place, because he had an instinct that eventually the Nazis are going to take over Lithuania and he'll never be able to get out. But he had a passport. He had a Holland passport. So he realized 3 things, and this is very important to remember. He needed 3 visas. An exit visa to get out of Russia, because Russia was now controlling Lithuania. If he wanted to go to a place that still had connection to Holland, there was a Dutch colony that was 5 1,400 miles away from Vilna, a little place called Curacao. But he felt that he could get to Curacao because, after all, that was part of the Dutch colonies. It was under the Dutch government. But in order to get there, he had to have an exit visa from Russia, a transit visa from Japan to get through Japan, and then on the other side of the water, he would be able to go 60 miles north of the Caribbean to this little town of Curacao. Very few Bochum had passports. Very few Bochum could get these visas. So what Nochem Goodworth did was he wrote a letter to the ambassador of Holland, who was someplace in Lita, and he said, listen, I want to get to Curacao. Could you give me a visa? Just sign my papers that I could get to Curacao. So this guy, Dr. De Decker, told him, you don't need a visa to get to Curacao. All you need is the governor's permission. And if you could get the government's permission, you'll be let in. But you don't need a visa to get into Curacao. Now listen to the brilliance of Nochem Goodworth. Nochem Goodworth heard these words that you don't need a visa to get to Curacao. So he figured, I don't have to tell everybody that you need the permission. If I could go to the Japanese authorities or the Russian authorities and tell them you don't need a visa to get to Curacao, so that means that I could go in. I don't have to tell them you need permission from the governor. So he writes to De Decker and says, could you write me a letter that I don't need a visa to get into Curacao? He said, you don't need me. There's a guy who's a Dutch consul, Jan Zwartendijk. He's in Kovna. He'll sign the papers for you. I'll send him a letter. He'll be able to sign. Nochem Goodworth goes to this guy, Jan Zwartendijk. He says, for sure, I'll sign. You don't need a visa. So now, listen to this. Now we'll see a Sor Leroy's person. He runs, and now he's got this passport signed. You don't need a visa to get into Curacao. So he goes to two more Bochum who had come from Holland and were also in Telz, and their names were Chaim Nussbaum and his brother. And Chaim Nussbaum and his brother also had been learning in Telz. And now he said to them, come with me, and Zwartendijk will sign that we don't need a visa. They went to the Japanese consul, a guy, Sempo Sugihara, many of you know the name, and he said, well, if you don't need a visa to get to Curacao, here's the transit visa. So they had 2 out of 3. And now they would just have to wait for Russia to give permission. So what would any of us do? We would be still, we would be quiet, we wouldn't say anything, we don't want to get in trouble. You know what Nochem Goodworth did? He ran around the streets trying to find yeshiva bochum that had passports. And he said, come with me. Come with me. You got a passport. I'll get it signed from Zwartendijk that you could be free, that you could go to Curacao. You don't need a visa. We'll go to Sempo Sugihara and we'll get the transit visa. And he got another 17 boys ready to get out as soon as Russia would give the tanks. Now, 40 miles from Vilna, there was the Mir Yeshiva. There was a great Talmud Chacham who eventually became one of the Rosh Yeshivas, Rab Leib Malin. Rachmana Litzlan, he never had any children. But Rab Leib Malin was looking for ways to get out. And he came to Kovna, and they told him, there's this guy Goodworth. He knows how to do it. So Rab Leib Malin met Nochem Goodworth. And he said, how are you doing it? He said, I have a guy that will sign anybody. He said, I got 300 Bachrim in Mir. You think he'll sign 300 passports? He said, you get me the passports, I'll get Zwartendijk to sign. Not everybody in Mir had a passport. And Rosh Yeshivas, many people don't know this. Some of the Rosh Yeshivas were angry at Rab Leib Malin. You're going to leave Russia. Russia will get angry. Who knows what they'll do to us? Rab Leib Malin said, we got to get out of here. So all the Bachrim in Mir who had passports, he brought them to Zwartendijk. And Nochem Goodworth and Zwartendijk for hours every day signed passport after passport after passport saying you don't need a visa to go to Curacao. And where Rab Leib saw that this is possible, only half the boys in Mir had passports. So they made up false passports. They took pictures of every Bacher, had them signed in English and in French, and put a stamp on it, and took hundreds of every kid in Mir was able to get out. Why? Because of Nachum Goodworth and Jan Zwartendijk. But it was his idea to go to Jan Zwartendijk and get him signed. Now there was another person, Zorach Warhaftik, who eventually moved to Eretz Yisrael. He heard about Goodworth. He ran to him, he says, how are you doing it? He says, follow me, I'll take you to Zwartendijk. And through Warhaftik, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people got out. Because Nachum Goodworth and Jan Zwartendijk, days and days and days, for weeks, until Zwartendijk was called back to Holland. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are alive today because Nachum Goodworth was the Sorleros. He could have hid it. Most of us would keep it quiet. We wouldn't say anything. But Nachum Goodworth realized a Yid has to have a heart. A Yid has to have seichel. A Yid has to have siyata d'shmaya. And a Yid has to care. And when you care, you could change the world. Today, probably 100,000 people are alive. If you count all the doires from all the people in Mir and all the people who got out from Lithuania because of what he did. So when a child lives in a house like that, and she grows up in a house like that, that's always talking about it, of course. She's going to be involved in Bika Cholim and Tikvatenu and in Zeisranan and all these things. And that's what I'm telling everybody. We have to become such parents and grandparents to be zoichet to such children. Such children don't happen by themselves. Feigy Wasyng became who she became because she had such a father. And because her mother would send packages to Russia. So I want to tell you one more thing and then we'll continue with something else. Rabbi Rafal Shmulevitz told me, not that I heard it from anybody else. I was in a sukkah one night, Cholamoid Sukkahs, and we were talking. He told me he doesn't remember the whole running from Mir to Shanghai and all that with the visas because he was 4 years old at that time. He said, but I'll tell you what we did. We wanted to honor Jan Zwartendijk's family because he had passed away. And so in the Mir Yeshiva, they had a whole kinus. They had a whole dinner for his family, honoring him for signing all the papers and making it possible that they should get out. And there was a man there, a Velvo Brukovsky, who said something that's out of this world. The Pasuk tells us by Noach, in Bereshis Vov Pasuk Tezayin, Tzoyhar Tase Lateva, that you should make a tzoyar. David said to Noach, he should make a tzoyar, so there's a machlokes. Rashi says, some say it was a chaloina window, some say it was an Evan Tova, like a chandelier. So Rabbi Rafal told me that Ravel Prokofsky said, why do we have to know this machlokes? Why is Rashi telling us this? And Rabbi Rafal said in the name of Ravel Prokofsky a fabulous insight. He said there's a big difference whether it was a chandelier or whether it was a chaloin. A chandelier gives light for ourselves. But a window, it doesn't only bring in light, it allows you to look out and see those who don't have what you have. And Rabbi Rafal told me that when a younger man gets married in Mir, he tells them this pasuk, Tzoyhar Tasal Ateva. Baruch Hashem, you got married. Baruch Hashem, you have a family. Make sure those Baruchim that are single, make sure those that have less than you look out that window. That's the Pshat Tzoyhar Tasal Ateva. Noach had to look out and have Rachmanis on those that had less than him. That's how you become great. And that's what Nachum Goodworth had. His house was at Tzoyar Tasal Ateva. And when you came to the Wasyng home, you felt that. It wasn't only the beauty of the home and the beauty of the children and the whole atmosphere, but there are a lot of people out there didn't have what they had. And so therefore they had that Tzoyar Tasal Ateva. And that's why we come here tonight. Not only to praise Feigy Wasyng, but to emulate. Emulate means to imitate and to learn from her. Every one of us has to walk out of here tonight understanding that we must become people of Sar Lirais. No matter where you are in the world, there are people that have less than you. And if there are people that have less than you, whether it's talent, funds, family, whatever, You have to be there for them. You have to have that tzoyar, tasa lateva. That's what we come here for tonight, to learn from this great person. The Nefesh HaChaim writes, and it's very interesting, the Nefesh HaChaim, of course, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Hakdama was written by his son, Rebetzin. And we know that the Nefesh HaChaim can be a difficult sefer, especially from Perik Shlishi and on. But the introduction is very, very easy to understand. And he writes like this. My father used to give me musar when he saw that I didn't get involved in people's problems. This is what he told me. And we have to remember these words. You are not created for yourself. The Eibusha didn't bring you into this world that you should become rich and famous. The Eibusha brought you into this world. Look out at other people. That's what Reb Chaim Volozhiner used to tell his son. That's why he said these words. And so the question is, what can we do? What can we learn from Feigy Wasyng Allah Shalom? How can we change? First of all, to keep her memory alive, and so that we should become Soliris type of people, that we should become Tzoyar Tasa Lateva people. So the Rav Shlita mentioned the Chavetz Chaim. I want to read you Sefer Avos Chesed Perek Yud Beis. U'ma'oid, sagt the Chavetz Chaim, tzorech lizoher shelo yechsa lo midas hachesed afilo yom echad mimei chayav. From tonight on, not one person should go to sleep any day until you do a favor for another yid. And he writes, just like a person is supposed to be kaveya itim latayra every day, a person is supposed to do a chesed every day. And so what I would suggest to do here in Antwerp and wherever this is going to be shown all over the world through Torah Anytime, and again, we thank Danny Benjamin. Every one of us should have a spiral notebook, a Sor Lirois Chesed notebook. Tonight, when you go home, take out a spiral and write on top, Sor Lirois Chesed notebook, L'Zeichen Nishmas, Feigy Wasyng. And every day, don't go to sleep until you do a chesed for another yid. And I guarantee you, your life will change. You do this 40, 50 days in a row, you'll be a different person. Because when you do for others, others will do for you. And that's how Feigy Wasyng's life will be remembered. Because of all the chesed that she did, it shouldn't go to waste. Of course, those people gained from it. But if we tonight make up to have a spiral in our home, a notebook that says Sor Lirois Chesed Journal, L'Zeichen Nishmas Feigy. So what's the question? We'll become different people. We'll become elevated people. That's really what we come to this world for. That's the Tzoyar Tasa Lateva, and that's the Sor Lirois. I just want to tell you one more thing, and we'll end with a fabulous story. I think this is one of the greatest things that I ever heard from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Now we know that the story where Yitzchak wanted to give a bracha to Esav. So Yitzchak sends out Esav, and the pasuk, I want to show it to you so that you could see the genius of Reb Chaim. The pasuk tells us, Vayovei la'aviv. He brought food to his father. Take a look at these words. Anybody notice something unusual about these words? Denny, I want to be sure that you see it on the camera. Well, there you go, right? He figured it out right away. It's a palindrome. You can read it frontwards and backwards. You and I have read this pasuk 1,000 times. Only Reb Chaim realized, wait a second, this is a palindrome. You can read it frontwards and backwards. I don't know if Reb Shifra bekent zu sehen, als bekent es leinen hinkriegt. Zok Reb Chaim, you know what the muvan of this is? It's not only a cutesy thing. The way you treat your parents, that's how your children are going to treat you. How do you like that? The way you treat your parents, that's how your children are going to treat you. You want to know why Feigy and Rab Baruch's Yibon L'Chaim's children are so loving and caring to the parents? Because they saw how Feigy treated her father and mother. That's what it's all about. And if any of you have nasty children at home, I'll tell you what to do. Look in the mirror. Maybe you'll see that, the way you've been acting is not so, good and not so great, and maybe that's why you got the kids you got. But Vayovel La'oviv, oh, that's really what it's all about. So I just want to end with this fabulous story that happened in Lakewood a number of years ago. And I'm going to tell it. I don't know how many people are here tonight. I'm going to be by the chinuch talk, but I'm going to tell this story as well. In Lakewood a number of years ago, they decided that they're going to close the Chadorim, not the Beis Medrash, they're going to close the Chadorim 3 days before Yontif, because Pesach is a very, very busy time. And like this, the young Rebbeim will be able to help in the house. There's a lot of work to be done before Yontif. Vahi Hayom, it's 2 days before Yontif, and a 5th grade Rebbe, grade 5 Rebbe, comes into the kitchen, and he says to his wife, can I help you? We have off. And they gave us off, so we should be able to help you. So she says, you really want to help? He says, yeah, of course. She says, look, Baruch Hashem, we have 6 kids. If you could take the 6 kids out of the house for 4 hours, I'll be able to bake and cook and clean. It'll be wonderful. And he's thinking, what in the world is he going to do with kids in Lakewood for 4 hours? But then he remembers that Newark Airport, it's an hour away from Lakewood. So they were never in the airport. So if he takes him to Newark, that's 1 hour there, 1 hour back, so he already shot 2 hours. Now he's got to figure out what to do with the other 2 hours. Then he remembers that in Newark Airport there's an air train. Now I don't know how many of you have traveled recently, but the airports today are monstrous. So if you're landing United Airlines, you got to go to Delta, or you got to go to American. So there's a train, it's called an air train. In some places in Atlanta it's underground, but in Newark it's overground. And it goes from one terminal to the other. So he figured these kids, they never were on an air train. Well, it's a beautiful thing. They go from one terminal to you don't pay. You just pay for long-term parking, right? So he figures he's going to take his kids, and these kids are traveling on the train, and it goes over the Jersey Turnpike, and they see the planes taking off and landing, and they're just having a great time. They're on the train for 2 hours. And then a pilot walks on. Pilot, very neat-looking fellow with a tie and a cap and a uniform. And these pilots are wonderful people, most of them. And they see a father with 6 kids. So they go over to the kids. And he goes over to the kids. He says, where are you guys flying today? They didn't know what to say. So they look at the father. And the father says, actually, sir, we're flying nowhere. The pilot says, you're flying nowhere? What are you doing here? So he says, we have a religious holiday coming up, and it's very, very busy. So my wife asked me if I could take the kids out of the house for 4 hours. She'll be able to bake and cook and clean, and it'll be very good. And we're just having a great time together for the last 2 hours. The pilot got very serious, and he said, young man, I want to tell you something. I have been a pilot for 25 years. There's not a major airport in the world that I haven't landed in. He said, 2 years ago, I got a text from my son. He said, Dad, you're always so busy. You never have time for me. You never came to my birthday parties. You didn't even come to my graduation. And last week was the birthday of your first grandson, my son. And you didn't show up. Do me a favor. Take my number out of your contacts. And then he said, 2 weeks later, I got the same text from my daughter. Take my number out of your contacts. He said, young man, I have flown everywhere, but gone nowhere. You told me you're flying nowhere, but with your kids, you're going everywhere. I just want to repeat that because how great that is. He said, I have flown everywhere, but obviously gone nowhere. You told me you're flying nowhere, but with your kids, you're going everywhere. That lesson is the most important lesson that we can learn about chinuch. Spending time with your children. And that's what Feigy and Yabod L'Chaim Rabbaruch are all about. You know why they have the children they have? I'm not going to tell you where they went on vacations. That's private. But they all went together. They all spent time quality time with their children. Rabbi Baruch is a bigger masmid than all of us. But yet somehow he made time for his children, as did Feigy. And that's why the family is so extraordinary. Baruch Hashem, Adbias Agoya. And that's what we have to learn, the final lesson. More than anything else, they were family people. Of course they were Soliris. Of course they were Balei Chesed. And of course we should start that Soliris Chesed journal in her memory. But it's not only about the Welt. Don't ever forget about your family. Because a family that has children that go off the derech, that's Gehenna on this world. And one of the reasons it happens, not only, one of the reasons is because parents are too busy. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight when we talk about chinuch. Stop being so busy. The Eibishter gave you children and grandchildren. That's the greatest gift in the world that you have. And if you spend time with them, you'll have children like the Wasyng family. That's really what it's all about. The Eibishter should bench all of us on this Leil Kodesh, on this Heilige night. We're going to make a siyum, because as Rabbi Baruch told me, more than anything else, Feigy wanted that he should sit and learn. They were in Ponevezh for 2 years. And Feigy just kept telling Rabbi Baruch, don't worry about Parnasa, I'll take care of that. You just sit and learn. How beautiful it is down in that Leil Kodesh of a Shloshim that we're finishing tonight, Shisha Siddur Mishnah. The Eibishter should help that we should use this evening as a jumping off point for all of us to become people of Chesed, Solirois, Tzoyatasa Lateva, and to make sure that we spend time with our children and grandchildren. In that way, we'll be Zoicha, hopefully, as soon as possible, to see Mashiach and be Tchias HaMesim and be reunited with all the wonderful people in our past. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening.